So, me, ka. Yeah. It means respect. So you know that song by
you spoke earlier about the separations of the bloodlines between the older, the younger, and you just spoke about in your own, when you all do certain things, like the elders have to come back to like brew the beer, things like that. Has there been any strides at reparation? I mean, not reparations, at repair in bloodlines to kind of like bring the families back together, or is it just kind of how it is, and you come together for just those?
They are together. So I mean, so let me give you a more like a more apartheid era. So one of my grandfather's brothers, was so light-skinned that he passed for colored. So in South Africa, colored meant you were mixed race. So he passed for colored, married a mixed race woman, and had a whole family. And we sort of knew they were there when we were growing up. But as I said, it's kind of like our parents, almost our grandparents didn't want us to talk to the wrong people, if I can put it like that. So they didn't give you any of the information. They'd just say, oh, he lives in the colored township or whatever. They'd say something like that. And that part of my family, they just came back into the family. The reparations, interestingly enough, at least for like, my mom has become the family photography archivist, because then the family albums come out, right? And one of the ways in which the repair is done is they start making copies of the same photo and then redistributing it to all the members of the family. So people who may have felt that they were outside of the family, they are brought in again. It's kind of like, as I say, my mom will give them an album, let's say, full of photos of their mom, who maybe their mom died young and they've never seen their mom. And so my mom does that for the family. So there is a lot of repair, but there's also, speaking about the larger South African society, there is a very, what I find an uncomfortable attempt by people to speak on behalf of other people. And I'm one of those black people. I'm like, every black person has the right to be black in their own way. There's no way that you can go up to somebody else and say, well, your version of blackness is not my version of blackness, and so you do not belong to the fold. And so one of the things, for example, is exactly this attempt to out people who did that. So many, as I say, many people in South Africa who are categorized as mixed race have got black relatives, and they know who they are. They know their black relatives. They can say, my grandfather was Dlamini, they come from there, da, 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 da. And many of them are slowly repairing and getting back with those families, but they're doing it in their own way. And there's no prescribed way. As I say, there's no way that it makes any sense for me, for one black person to go out to another black person and say, your version of blackness is the wrong one. Mine is the right one. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like, why? Because it's not like we're running out of time. So this is what I normally say to my students. I say, what was built before can be rebuilt. We've got the time. It's not like we're going anywhere. We're gonna be human for several thousands years. And so this is one of the anxieties that I see many of my students have, is they think the world is gonna end, like in the next 20 years, like in this whole global warming. Like they're so confused as young people. So they think that every historical issue has to be resolved now because the world is not going to be here. I'm like, you're going to be human for several thousand years. The machines are not going to take over. Relax. So I mean, yeah, you know, we still have a long way to go as humans, and as black-skinned humans, we have an even longer way to go. I mean, we have a whole continent that needs us, that needs the stories, that need, You know, so like for example, at the moment, just to give you a sense of the fact that I do other things, I'm working on a film as a consultant for a film, and I mean, whoa, like the film industry is a whole other story, and you know, to have to make decisions about what black people look like 300 years ago and making it for television, like no. But no, black does not work as a color. Brown does not work. We need like red. Did they wear red? Like, so to get a film director calling you and say, we need to put blue in the film. Did they wear blue? And now you have to decide whether people from 300 years ago wore blue. And you're like, how am I supposed to know? So, I mean, this is like another aspect of being black and the way in which now people are interested in making films about black stories. You know, the whole Wakanda effect. Now everyone wants to make a kind of Wakanda style film. And so you also have another responsibility, which is the responsibility to the past, which is like a responsibility that many of us are not, we were not born for it. We have to learn to be it. You know, we were not born to be responsible for the past, but now we have to learn. Okay, now I'm responsible for the past as well. And it's a totally different kind of responsibility.
So we have to learn to be responsible for the past?
Huh?
We have to learn to be responsible for the past?
In a way, yes. Because there's a way in which, so for example, many of my students are often shocked when I tell them that just because someone was black in the past doesn't mean you have the right to appropriate them. Doesn't mean you have the right to speak for them. They can still refuse. You know, in our traditions, the ancestors, you can go to the ancestors and pray and beg and do. They may just refuse and say, no, I don't want to be part of your story. Find another story. Leave me alone. I'm rest. I'm resting. And so if our ancestors want to rest, sometimes you just have to let them rest. Say, let them rest. Don't keep forcing them. Be like, be my ancestor. Sometimes they just want So I mean, as I say, sometimes my students find it very uncomfortable because they want to feel that they are speaking directly to the ancestors. They are slaughtering goats and all these things. And I'm like, sometimes the ancestors say no. It's part of African beliefs to believe that sometimes the gate is closed, the path is closed, it's not there. You have to find some other way. And it's part of our traditions. There's nothing, it's almost like I think this idea like, I sometimes say it's like a commodity idea that you can bribe the ancestors. What is the price? What price do I have to pay for you to put it in my palm? So that it's exactly like that kind of idea. And it's like maybe they don't work like that. Maybe they don't work like that.
We have commercialized the ancestors.
Right. So you commercialize it and commodify it. We commodify Jesus. We commodify God. Why would we not try to commodify the ancestors?
Yes, yeah. So I mean, in South Africa. So let me tell you. Like this is I almost feel like I should tell it to you off the record. So I live in a high-rise building in the city of Johannesburg, and not a lot of black South Africans choose to live in high-rise buildings. So I live there because it's sort of like it's got like a New York feel. So there's a woman in my building who is initiating people to be divinas. But now she was using water from our swimming pool to do this divination. I was like, what? You are telling people that you are communicating with the ancestors. You're using water from our swimming pool. Now, how did I find this out? I found this out from the security because they can see her on the camera. So, I mean, things like that. And these young people are paying to communicate with the ancestors and initiate them into being divinas. And I'm like, when you get to the other side, there will be hell to pay. You will have a lot of questions to answer when you get to the other side. You'll be like, we don't know you. All that stuff you were doing we don't know that stuff. We never asked for that. So I mean, as I say, it's a very difficult conversation to have because, as I say, people almost treat their ancestors like a commodity. Like, I asked my ancestors for a Bugatti, but okay, let's see. You see what I mean? It's like a very, in South Africa people say, I want to win the lottery. Any other thoughts?
You can drop the mic right there. Oh, I've already worked down. Let the ancestors rest.
I know me.
Yes.
I know a lot of women in here are very selfish about sharing our mates.
Yes.
And I know that African men, some, I guess, I don't know which one, can marry multiple wives.
Mm-hmm.
I know sometimes they'll do that because the first one do not give them a son, and then the second one, whatever. Now, do the woman have the right to say no?
To what?
So marrying this man, because she don't want to be second or third or fourth wife. Do she have the right to say no?
Well, in South Africa, you see, legally. So the new government, when they came in, the South African Constitution considers customary practices as legal but within limits. So if a man wants to so everyone is essentially allowed to take a second wife or partner. So in South Africa, same-sex marriages are also legal. So if you are in a same-sex marriage, you are also allowed to have a second partner. So polygamy applies to you as well. Yes. Yeah. No. So this is wait. I'm getting to that part. So all along it was considered to be a male choice. A man chooses more than one wife. Right. Then last year, I think it was, an MP in Parliament tried to pass propose a law where women would then be allowed to also have more than one husband. Oh my God. You have never seen so many people protect the sanctity of marriage. All of a sudden people are like, so let me tell you, one of the funniest questions. How will you know which one is the father? And I'm like, that is the point. That is exactly the point. I mean, if you're going to have more than one husband, the whole point is that all of them are going to be the father. Right? It's not that you're going to be like, oh, you're the daddy for number one, you're the daddy for number two. They all become the fathers or whatever. And the uproar. So people were doing all these memes. I don't know if any of you do matchy with your partners. So they were doing all these memes where they would show two guys all wearing the same outfit with their woman. Like, this is what happens when you marry. The whole country was in uproar. And I actually think it's going to happen. Yes, I think it's going to happen. South Africa is actually, I think, going to legalize polyamory. So polygamy is already legal. So one of the reasons why in South Africa is exactly because of these many traditions. So I mean, Islam has been in South Africa since the 17th century. So the Constitutional Court essentially put together all those traditions, the African traditions, the Islamic traditions, and wrote a law that allows everyone to essentially practice if they want to. There's even a show in South Africa, like a TV show, where this guy has got another wife and he gives advice. I have no idea. I don't watch television. So I get the news from my cousins that there was another fight over polygamy. So a lot of younger women, for example, are gunning for wealthier men by sort of inching towards the polygamy thing. Like, of course I can be number two, I can be wife number two. So in many cases, it's not the real deal. It's not polygamy the way it was done before. It's just a side chick who wants to a side chick. That's exactly. So I mean, it's exactly. So yeah. And so it's exactly that. But as I say, in South Africa, the constitutional court is constantly making rulings that make the country go berserk because people are like, no, women cannot have more than one husband. And it's like, no, it's exactly right. The logic follows. Yeah. So yes. So does that answer your question? Yes. So as I say, in South Africa, a lot of polygamy is just about side chicks who just keep calling. And they keep
already in the mix.
Yes, and so it's almost like, and this is what the show is about. It's about the first wife then being introduced to the side chicks and it's. I mean, people are just like, but this was not what polygamy originally was intended. No, John Donne. Yes, John Donne is literally South Africa's biggest polygamist, and he was white. He had 30 Zulu wives. 33 Zulu. Exactly. And as I say, he was a friend of the Zulu king. He presented himself as a friend until the British came knocking to give him his kingdom. But just to give you a sense also of how this works out, his descendants are all people of mixed race. And many of them tried to claim the land that their father had got or their great-grandfather had gotten. And it became a very protracted, and it really revealed a lot about South African history during the land restitution process in South Africa. That they were like, our land was given to us by the Zulu king. It's a very interesting story. In fact, one of the descendants is a very well-known. That's the ancestors coming down.
That was they Ashe on
it. Any other questions? Oh, I can see two questions right there. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask you two questions. One, what drew your interest with the men South Africa in the army? Military. And then secondly, can you define and how do you define blackness with your students?
Okay. I'll take that question because it's two questions. The military issue is very. So, one of the texts that Konenzo and his missionaries produced was a court, as I was telling you, he would act as a kind of friend of the court. Was this long transcript about a Hlubi chief called Langa Libalele, whom the British accused of sedition and essentially destroyed overnight. They destroyed his kingdom and took away his position as a chief. Kalenzo then, in his role as a bishop and missionary, goes and investigates. So sends out his converts to find all the people who were forced to testify by the colonial government, and then re-asks them questions. What really happened? And then essentially the story goes like this, that he was subpoenaed by the colonial government. This chief was subpoenaed by the colonial government, did not want to appear, and so prevaricated. So in African society, you can prevaricate appearing in front of the chief forever, indefinitely. If you say, I'm indisposed, my back aches, my knees ache, my head aches. You can do it for months. It's totally an accepted way of delaying what you imagine is going to be a horrible discussion or court case or whatever. So Langa Libalele does the same thing. And while he's doing that, the colonial government sends a messenger. And that messenger is stripped of his clothes. So they make him take off, before he can see the chief, they make him take off his coat. But now when you read the description, you're like, what was an African man in the heat of summer doing, wearing a huge big great coat, wearing all these, and they list the items in the testimony. It's like, this sounds very peculiar. Like, why would Africans have just picked on this guy and said, strip your clothes, take off everything? But now when Kalenzo does his investigation, the reason why the Africans stripped him is because literally like 20 years before, a colonial official had pulled out a gun from the sleeve of a coat and shot a chief and killed him. So the Africans were like, oh yeah, we know when you are a messenger of the colonial government, you hide a gun inside your coat. So that's what they were doing.
Wow.
So then Conenzo writes about this, and I'm thinking, where did these coats come from? So that's how the story started for me, is this man, this messenger who was stripped of his coat. And as I say, I mean, when I read this transcript, I was like, what is an African man doing in the heat of summer? I wish I could show you these photographs of what these men look like. I mean, they would literally be wearing these huge, great wool coats, like all buttoned up to here, all the way down, and then holding a spear or what is called a nokiri in South Africa. So it's like a stick that's got a head. And they would be like the messengers of this. So I mean, if someone walked towards your house looking like that, you would also be like, I don't even want to know what they're going to say. I'm running. You'll catch me on the other side. And so I started off looking at this particular incident. And then I decided to go and try and find the photographs. An unbelievable, again, archive. Dozens and dozens of photographs of African men in military uniform, sort of. And then the most surprising story, and some of you may be surprised to find this out, but in South Africa, the first domestic workers were actually Zulu men. So these Zulu men were wearing these white tunics with like a red border. In colloquial South African language, they call it umatande kishin, the suit. It's called sort of like kitchen work, but not quite. These men were wearing this in the 19th century. And they were the first domestic workers. So white families would hire black Zulu men as nannies and domestic workers. Wow. So the whole story of how it is that domestic work is women's work, in South Africa, it does not work out. In fact, the first domestic workers were Zulu men. And they were looking after children. So now, again, I'm reading all these white women, right, who are talking about these black men, like, oh, Jim fed the baby a bird yesterday. I had to go retrieve a bird from the baby's mouth. But at the same time, these Zulu men are doing a perfect job of looking after, pushing prams, feeding babies. But then you also get these funny stories like a baby eating a bird or whatever. So a lot of this is coming from, and I've had to make peace with white women as actually being some of the best describers of clothing, because they would describe every detail. Say, he showed up wearing like a British navy blue coat with pantaloons, with French pantaloons, and they would give these detailed descriptions. And so I've had to rely on those descriptions and then put the photographs together. I don't know if it's going to work as a book, because I think I always end up saying more controversial things than I intended, because what this story actually shows is that, again, many of these uniforms were arriving even in the absence of white colonial presence. So, like the second-hand clothing market, it seems that Europe would essentially just put like a whole cargo of military uniforms and then just dump them in South Africa. And these men were buying them, and they would sew out in the frontier. They're out killing people. They would be sewing stripes on their pants and then striding around the camp, showing their white commanders that I can also strut around like you. So the word swagger comes up so many times. These black guys were in the camp swaggering in their uniform. So they were showing the white officials that I can be a better soldier than you. It looks better on me. It looks good. So I think a lot of people may find that a controversial thing to say, because they were out there killing people. They were out there running around delivering bad news to people. But they were doing it in style. They were like, I've got style for days. Doesn't matter that it's hot. I'll wear this coat. So it's exactly that. It's like, And yeah, so for me, it was really about taking the story of Magma, Fuze and the Kolenzos further by just investigating this one moment in their archive when this man is stripped of his coat. And then I'm trying to understand, like, why would you be stripped of your coat if you just were delivering a message? So, I mean, as I say, there was a story that had happened 20 years or so previously of a white official pulling a gun from the sleeve of a coat and shooting somebody. And the Africans were like, we know your ways. So it says exactly that. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But there was a second question.
Define
Blackness. Yes. I mean, for me, this is where I tell my students, I say, please don't tell me anything about how a person looks. Because there's nothing at all about blackness that has anything to do with the way you look. Blackness is a state of mind. That's what I tell my students. It's a state of mind.
Yes.
You are black because you think black thoughts. And for me, that's how I define blackness. Exactly because, so let me give you another story of how it is that it humbles you that moment when it happens, when you realize really truly that blackness has nothing to do with skin color. So in Cape Town, when I was a student, you have these taxis, I'm sure you've seen them, they drive badly, so they're very obvious. These minibus taxis, they fly all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
So in Cape Town, there's a guy who stands out the window and calls and tells you where the taxi is going. So, and I'm about to get on the taxi, and I'm walking towards, and I'm thinking, why is a white guy working in a taxi? I mean, this is a job that white people would never take. And I'm walking towards the taxi. I get in the taxi and I sit inside. This man has got the lightest skin you've ever seen in your life. He's got blue eyes. He's got blondish hair. I mean, literally, when you look at him, you think you're looking at a white man. And then he opens his mouth. So in Cape Town, they call it kapse. Like there's an accent which tells you, okay, you are not a white person. That's all I can say. I don't know what else I can say, but you're definitely not he spoke with the blackest black accent you ever, like from the Cape. And you could just be like, okay, no, he's not. And the very fact that he chose that job showed that he understood that in any other job, he would be mistaken for a white man. Wow. In that job, you definitely cannot say he's a white guy. So if he had gone, even if he had been a cashier at a supermarket, he would have been treated as a white guy. He had everything that, like people like to talk about phenotype now. Phenotypically, everything was white, but just everything about his personality, the way he interacted with people, the way he talked, black. And I was like, this is the moment at which you realize that exactly that blackness is not only a state of mind, but a choice, that he was choosing to be black. So by being in the taxi, he was like, I'm choosing to be black. I don't want to be mistaken for a white man. So for me, that's how I define. And again, in South Africa, these issues are very controversial because many people don't want to hear that. They want to imagine that every black person has got dark skin, every black person has got some kind of marker that marks you. And I say, but you are thinking like a racist. Like when my students say that, I say, but that's how racists think. They think every time they see a black skin, it means black person. That black people can never be light skinned. Like, why would you want to adopt that kind of racist definition of blackness? Because for me, that's what it means. When you start asking people who's your mother, who's your father, how dark is your mother, how light is your mother, then you are no different from the racists. I'm like, for me, that's blackness. But it's also, as I say, about the upbringing that I was given by my grandmother. You know, she would really, so as a child, being dark-skinned, for example, I used to come back from school and tell my grandmother that people were teasing me about my dark skin. My grandma would be like, you must tell them, black is beautiful, white is common. That's what my grandma would. And so when I found out where my grandma grandmother had gotten the black is beautiful part. I was like, but where did the white is common part come from? My grandmother added it for extra effect. So I mean, that is sort of even the ideology that my grandparents raised me with. That, blackness is a state of mind. You choose your people. You choose your community.
Yes.
You choose to fight the black fight. Nobody gives it to you. Nobody. It's not a genetic. I mean, if it was just a genetic thing, we would all be in the trenches.
That's right.
We would all be fighting. No, not all of us are doing that. So this is exactly it. So as I say, that's what I use when I write as well. That definition, that if someone says I am black because I choose to be black.
Yeah.
In fact, actually a beautiful example is another intellectual like Magma Fuze. His name was Tio Soga. Tio Soga went to Scotland, trained in Scotland, and came back to South Africa as a minister and married a Scottish wife. And I think in his will, he wrote this to his children. He said, live in the world as black men. Whatever advantages you may get from your mother's association, live in the world as black people. And so when I tell my children, I say, Tio Soga told that to his children, that live in the world as a black person. And many of his kids, like one of his sons, also wrote an unbelievable history book. John Henderson Soga. One of his sons was the first person in South Africa to qualify as a vet. So, I mean, the Veterinarian Society of South Africa recently did a whole hoo-ha. Like, wow, a black person was the first vet in South Africa. He was the first person to study veterinarian science. So, I mean, exactly these kinds of things. But as I say, he told his kids, live in the world as black men. Whatever advantages you may gain from your mother's association, good, but live in the world as black men. So that's, for me, those are the examples that I quote. Does that answer your, Thank you.
Well, I want to jump in on that.
Yes.
Tio Soga's expression. So you speak a lot on the Natal region with Makeba Fezu and so forth. I mean, there's also names of William Giti and so forth. I'm wondering, with the publications, were they able to sort of interact with other guys, like such as Tio Soga, Sol Plaki, and others and so forth? Was that kind of interaction happening beyond the boundaries of Natal and so forth?
Exactly. So this is one of the things that, as I say, it's like when they talk about the bush telegraph, you all understand the term bush telegraph. So the fact that black people pass things on word of mouth. The grapevine. So in Africa, it used to be called the bush telegraph. So, I mean, they reconstructed a kind of bush telegraph where, like, all the stories that would be, because these newspapers used to be published sort of weekly or bi-weekly, then they would send the newspaper in the mail, and then they would write exact copies. They said, our friends, the Imvo Zawansundu say. So they would put a headline telling you which newspaper from which part of, or they would even publish in Setswana and Sesotho the exact article. Say, our friends Kuranta Yabatswana says, and then they would publish the article. So, I mean, when people talk about bilingualism and multilingualism, all of it, these people were practicing it back in the 19th century. They used to print newspapers in multilingual, in multiple languages, English, Sesotho, they put Zulu, they put, So this is where a lot of pushback. This idea of purity, that somehow one must arrive at some state of purity. I'm like, black people, we haven't got time for that. We haven't got time to be like, are you pure? Are you a pure black person? Are you a pure this? Are you a pure Zulu? Because this comes out in ethnic identification. Where people are like, well, are you a pure Zulu? I'm like, listen, my ancestors sent me this way. This is the way. I'm gonna live and die. What am I supposed to? So I'm, quote unquote, I come from two different ethnic groups, like totally opposite ethnic groups. In South Africa, you never even think of mixing. Like my mom is Zulu, but my dad is shaman. So when I tell people that, oh my God, they're like, what? Shaman? So the shamans are from like the north. of sort of close to Mozambique, all the way up. So I don't even know where my grandfather came from. We don't know. He became a minister in the Salvation Army. He became a, what do they call them in the Salvation Army? A general. Do they call him general? Yeah. So he trained as a minister. He completely never told his children where he had come from. So I know that somewhere up there, that's where I come. So people are like, oh, so you're not a pure Zulu. Oh my God. Wow. I've written the book, so I've paid my dues to my ancestors, so I've done the job. So yeah, so this is the other way that I answer questions about black. So in South Africa, they're also mixed with questions of sort of ethnicity, where people are so obsessed with the idea that you can be a pure anything. That's, yeah.
Prof,
yes.
What role, if any, did Fuze have in the translation of the Bible into Zulu? Or alternatively, did he express views about how it had been translated and what he felt about it?
Oh, I was going to talk about that in the second session.
So,
but let me give you again a tidbit. So this was like also very controversial. Because missionaries often used to use these newspapers to publish literally word lists and say, you know, do these words in indigenous languages fit with the Bible? So the Holy Spirit, you know, how do you... Now when you read some of these things, you suddenly realize that, yeah, you know, religion is actually a very tough thing to translate into another language. Because, I mean, like, you know, the Lamb of God, just trying to translate that idea into an indigenous language. Because then you end up with all sorts of, like, bizarre... Because, so for example, in Zulu, the diminutives for Zulu also happens to be like the word for which is the word that ended up being chosen. Imvana actually ultimately means small sheep. It doesn't actually mean Lamb of God. You know, and it's sort of like you end up with this very, very bizarre sort of
like the runt, the small sheep, the deformed sheep.
But the missionaries thought it was best to use these newspapers. And then when the missionary was not there, then the converts would argue amongst themselves. And so these are the debates that I put in my book, where then they would argue about things like, well, one of my favorite ones actually is Magma Fuze saying, oh, there are all these preachers. And he does it in a very kind of like, as if he's going to say something totally different. He says there are all these preachers who are inviting people to go and pray in the wilderness. And then he goes, and then they mix men and women. And then his punchline of the whole article is you cannot mix the leopard with the lambs. It's like, and it's so hilarious. And it's kind of like, he's writing a whole article and he waits until like the last sentence to just put in the punchline. And I'm not saying don't be a preacher who takes people out into the wilderness to pray, but you must know you are mixing the leopard with the lambs.
That's how we grow our congregation.
So this is exactly, so I mean, these kind of side swipes were about the interpretation of the Bible. So one of the articles that I actually published, if you're interested in reading it, was published in the Journal of Southern African Studies, is a whole debate about the place of Judaism in the history of black thought. So I mean, I published the article because Magma Fuze and his readers would argue about whether or not they belong to that line. That is, are we the lost tribe of Israel, essentially? You know, are we the lost tribes of Israel? So, I mean, people were really engaging with biblical texts. So that kind of exegesis, as it were, of sort of the Bible, is this story our story? You know, is the biblical story our story? And they debated those issues in the newspapers. And as I said, they would go on for weeks, and be like, yeah, in Hebrew, so it says this. John, this says that. And they would argue on and on about whether or not black people were the lost tribe of Israel, or the lost tribes of Israel. And again, if you're interested in this, in Southern Africa, there are people who actually claim to be part of that lineage, the Lembe. So, I mean, again, it's a real tradition, it exists.
So what is the title of that article?
Oh, you just need to get my book. Because if you read the book, you'll see I've got all the citations to the articles that he published are in the book. Oh, you mean the article that I published?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
What was it called again? Something to do with Black House. Huh? I've forgotten the title of my own article.
Because we were having this conversation, a few of us last night, about that relationship.
Yes. What did I publish it? But it's in the Journal of Southern African Studies.
Okay, we got it. Thank you.
Yeah? Sorry, have you got it?
Yeah, it's there.
How the Zulus became Jews.
Yes, how Zulus became Jews. That's how it is. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. So I mean, these Zulus were debating, but also the other interesting part is that from the colonial side, the colonizers were also like. So I mean, people like my great-grandfather often were called the Black Jews of Africa because they were entrepreneurs, they had businesses, they had. So it wasn't just on the one side. The sort of is this our story? The colonial side as well often used to say, oh, the Xhosas are Arabs and the Zulus are Jews. They used to come up with all sorts of interesting analogies about why it is that they would say that. Yeah. So, any other? Yes.
Just kind of a general. Do you find it interesting that when you're looking through the archives, that you find the history of the beginnings of what we feel like we invented today? Like when you were describing the newspaper, how someone kind of blasted somebody in the newspaper about being at a party. I thought about Facebook.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yes. So I don't know if you ever have these aha moments like, oh, okay, this is the beginning of what Instagram was, or whatever.
Yes.
Social media.
Exactly. No, I mean, as I say, it's almost like I use a lot of the theory. So one of the concepts that I use is the idea of a minor literature. So many writers who were writing, so Franz Kafka is often regarded as having written or contributed to a minor literature. You are a Jew living in a non-Jewish context, and then you have to write in German or in whatever language, French or whatever you find. So essentially you're creating, so this is the concept that I use, that these people had to put an entire culture, an entire civilization onto the pages of the newspaper. And that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to squeeze an entire culture onto the pages of the newspaper. Say, this is who we are. Do not misrepresent us. Don't let me be misunderstood. That's what they were being driven by. They were like, don't let me be misunderstood. I want to speak for myself. I want to put my culture. I want to put who I am, my ideas. And I mean, some of them, like people were writing about sociology. So there was like these articles. So a lot of these things I would copy when I'm in the archives, and now I'm going back. Like I've been writing about advertising in these newspapers. I mean, the things that black people were buying. You'd be like, oh, come to my shop. I have silk handkerchiefs. And you're like, wow. It never changed. Like as I say, it's like silk handkerchiefs, wool suits, jubilee brooches, you name it. People were buying all of these things, and you see the prices, how much it would cost. And it's so beautiful that these newspapers were able to even contain so many of these conversations. And I mean, now we have terabytes, gigabytes of just talking. They didn't have that. They didn't have terabytes and gigabytes. They had to put it on 16 pages and put an entire culture. So that's how I think about it, this sort of limit of having this cramped space in which to essentially put your thoughts and how to do it.
It was very interesting how you speak of missionaries and the mission stations,
right.
how they were sort of like the big brothers of
Right.
the community. And, I think theologically speaking, or from a liberation theology perspective, is that missionaries have this very bad reputation.
Right.
And is there any, personally, do you think that, yes, they skilled the locals and they provided, I guess, a place for comfort, but do you write about the other agenda that, the missionaries also came for?
Right. You can write 1,000,000 lines about all the other agendas in the plural that came with the luggage of the missionaries. But nothing, I think, changes that basic fact, which is that whether you like it or not, at one level they change the landscape, so they change the ecology of South Africa. Many of these mission stations, the remnants of the mission stations still there. So for example, the school that Magma Fuze went to, I went there. The building is still there. The building that was built in the 1840s, the little classroom is still there that the students attended in. So at the most basic level, they changed the landscape, so they changed the ecology of the country by introducing all of these plants which were not here, introducing different ways of doing agriculture. So at the most basic level, they changed just the physical reality of the people around them. They changed the physical reality. So whether you like it or not, that is one of the things we have to live with. And one of the, I'm not sure if many of you are sort of well versed in sort of Marxist theory. So one of the reasons why the condemnation of missionaries in South Africa became a kind of tradition is not because of any horrid things that missionaries did. It's just because of the influence of Marxist theory, where people would come and say, yeah, religion is the opium of the masses, and just to give you a sense of how it is that even that tradition is not. So one of the people who wrote one of these books, like The Missionaries Were Bad, her name is Hlonipha Mokoena. Right, but Hlonipha Mokoena is not a black person. She's a white woman, a Marxist, who knew that the book would only sell if she wrote under an African name. So she wrote under an African name. Yeah, the missionaries, they did this and they did all these horrible things. They took away African culture. But it's like she was writing as a Trotskyist, as a Marxist, not because she had ever lived on a mission station. So I'll give you another example of how it is that a lot of this condemnation is actually based on people not even understanding the history. So people like to call Fort Hare and say Fort Hare is South Africa's historically black university. And then I always say, oh, Fort Hare used to be a mission school. So Fort Hare, one of the premier academic institutions that many people think is a historically black university, is actually historically a mission school. Before it was a university, it was a mission school, it was a college. Every single person who went there was essentially signing up to be part of the missionary project. So again, history has a very good way of papering over the reality. Sorry, you had another
I was going to say, so missionaries are, I guess, God sending angels to come and save Africans.
No, not quite. No. I wouldn't go. That's not at all what I'm saying. No, I would not go that far. I would not. It's, as I say, it's like when you are driven by an idea, in exactly the same way that many communists came to South Africa. So again, if you look at just the history of communism in South Africa, it was mostly white people who would come. All these Irish Americans would run away from America, come here, be like, yeah, I'm going to start a revolution in South Africa. I'm going to get some black people, convert them to Marxism, whatever. It's the same thing. But nobody ever spends as much time saying, yeah, well, that was wrong, to give black people Marxism or Marxist theory. No, that's fine. But it's the same thing. You are giving someone an idea, and you're saying to them, this is what I believe in, right? And I'm going to try and make you believe in the same thing. So whether you're doing it for liberatory purposes or you're doing it for oppressing the person, and as I say, there is, so I call this the minority. So this is an idea that I'm working on. I call these texts minority reports, where you have these actual archive of minority reports, where you are already writing from a position of defeat. You know that for that moment you are defeated. There's nothing you can do. But you still want to put it on record that I fought the fight. I fought the fight. I was there. This is my statement. This is what I fought for. And many missionaries wrote those minority reports. They would say, I fought for this. I fought for this law to be passed so that Africans don't have to work as indentured laborers. I fought for this. I fought. So there are these minority reports, and some of them are written by black people. So if you discard the missionary minority reports, you also have to discard the black people. In, let's say, the United States, an African American who escapes slavery and writes about it, it's a minority report because they are writing as the one person who managed to flee a plantation. They're like, I just want to tell you what it was like. Yeah. I want you to know. I don't want you to pretend that I didn't tell you. You see what I mean? So there is a way in which South Africa has a whole history of these minority reports, but we ignore them. We want to say, oh, they were all oppressing black people. They were all doing this. This was their agenda. But there are these minority reports that tell you that they had something other than just that agenda. So I need to blow my nose there.
That's fine. That's a very, I think...
Yes, there was another question there before you.
Sorry.
Yeah, no.
So, just as you're speaking, I just had an epiphany that history, I guess, when told openly and objectively, it gives us, I guess, the space to sort of look at the landscape or the event multidimensionally.
Right.
And I think you're doing that.
Yeah.
Or you've done that with Magma and Fuze. So thank you for that.
Okay, so I just want to add one thing. I don't like claiming objectivity.
I very carefully.
Right. My basic position is, number one, as I said earlier, I feel as if I have to ask for permission to write a story. I do not assume that just because someone was black like me, that I can just simply walk into the archives and say, you are mine now, I'm going to write about you, I'm going to do whatever I want with your story. I still have to respect that that person was a real living person with real problems, So in the book that I wrote for Magma, the last chapter is about Magma Fuze's will. So let me give you an example of Magma Fuze. So Magma Fuze married more than one wife. But then, as happens in many polygamous families, his eldest son ran off with his youngest wife. So he has to write about this in the will. Say,
I need to read that.
his life was a hot mess. And you have to allow your historical subjects to be hot messes. You can't just be like, I want you to be perfect, I want a perfect story. It has to fit in with what I want the story to say. Everyone's life is a hot mess. And so you have to allow people to come in their messiness. So for me, history is, if I can put it to you like this, so if you had to ask me what is my attitude towards missionaries, I would use the word mercy. It's mercy. It's not you came to save Africans, whatever. Right. I am giving you a huge birth to be a human being, first and foremost. Many of them did the wrong things, but there is just even that 1% of mercy, where you say, I will write from that perspective as a historian, where I give someone just that mercy. Number one, they're dead, because that's also the other part of mercy, that as I say, we sometimes just have to let the ghosts go and say, let this ghost go. Let the ghost go. You cannot hold on. That's why a ghost is a ghost. You cannot hold on to that. You cannot hold on to the anger. Because the person is not here. Even to rectify their mistakes, even if they are on the other side and say, I made a mistake, they cannot come and rectify it. And then the second part of it, of the mercy, is that then, as I said earlier, it falls on us to then rectify those mistakes. Say, okay, this person messed up. They are not here to fix the mess. And now we have to fix it. So for example, my mom was telling me, she was saying, I can't remember what she was saying about church, but she was like, people now are so behind. In churches now, we have to deal with the fact that people who've become divinas, so people who are in touch with their ancestors and they're consulting with it, also want to come to church. And my mom was saying about the Salvation Army. She was like, the Salvation Army was started by alcoholics. Yeah. That's what my mom said. She's like, the Salvation Army was started by alcoholics. So it means any person can come with their messiness and come and worship God. You cannot lock the door and say, no, you can't come because you also believe in ancestors. They were alcoholics, the people who started the Salvation Army. So I was laughing at the fact that my mom was exactly that part of being human is learning to just be merciful to other human beings who have made their mistakes. So for me, I would say that is what divinity, if I can say that is what divinity, when as a human being, you try to embody divinity. It means you have to embody that place where you are merciful to people who don't even deserve it. You're like, I know you don't deserve my mercy, but I'm going to be merciful. You don't deserve it, but I will read your text as if you are sitting right here in the room with me. I will be sympathetic. I will understand your position. Even though you deserve none of those things, I will still do it. Because what else can you do? That's, as I say, it's the burden of being human. So that's how I think about it. So that's why I say I'm not telling you that you must forgive the missionaries or you must ignore what they did or whatever. Just be merciful. And also imagine it the other way around. Imagine that in another 100 years' time, you'll be dead. And people will try and speak on your behalf. Right. And you won't be able to say, no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. That's not what I said. That's not what I did. You are gone. And you will expect people to be merciful towards you, to not hold these absolutist ideas and say, well, you failed to do this. Like as I say, when I teach some of my students, they have a whole catalog of failure. And I'm like, wow. Yes. And are you perfect? Are you bringing your perfection to the table? 100 years from now, are people going to say, oh, there goes a perfect human being over there? No. There's at least one who lived was. No one can claim that. So you see what I mean? It's in another 100 years' time. So imagine all those tweets. So this is where you can see we are all incriminating ourselves. In exactly the same way that the missionaries incriminated themselves, writing letters, telling everyone what they were doing. Imagine in another 200 years' time, people reading your tweets, your emails, saying, woo! We've got them! We've got them! They were there! They were fornicating, they were doing this! Exactly, people will be there. Also, laying out your sins and your imperfections to the whole world. Yeah. And be like, you did this, you did that, here are the emails, you've got the proof. So I think there was another, and I'll come back to you. There was another question there. Yeah.
You started out by giving me your own biography. I did not hear you say that you were an anthropologist, but I'm sitting here marveling at what you have offered
Yeah.
And right away, the person that jumps in my head is Zordon Horston. You
Yes.
mentioned her.
Yes.
And she writes about the Cudjoe Lewis and Barracoon and
Yes.
just a whole anthropological piece of research around
Yes.
the first Africans off that last slave ship. And you talk about history in a way that's just mesmerizing. But I'm wondering, I'm going to say his name right, and I don't want to say it wrong, so I'm trying not to say it. But Fuze?
Yes. Yeah. Fuze. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're writing historical, and I'm wondering, is there something also as you move forward in your analysis, in your understanding of things, is there a contemporary subject that you would want to take on in your writing also about? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
History is not the past, history is also the present.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, where might any of your focus or attention be given to things that are happening right now, as connecting to the past that you also write eloquently about?
Right. Yeah. I mean, because I don't like claiming Zora Neale Hurston is kind of my ex, but I mean, I read Their Eyes Were Watching God when I was like 12, 13. I just devoured it. And then the book so many books are being published of Zora Neale Hurston's articles that she wrote, and they were never, I completely love her writing. So for contemporary issues, in South Africa, I try and stay away from the radio stations, the TV stations, and I don't do that. So at Whence, we have a huge communication department, and half the time they'll call me, like, the radio station wants to speak to you about this, and I'm like, I'm an African, I'm not available, my knee hurts. My back hurts, I'm not available. No. And one of the reasons why I refuse to do that is because of poor research. A lot of journalists just do really bad research, and then they expect you to plug the holes. I'm like, I'm not doing that. Come when you've done the research, and then I'll do the interview. So that I stay away from. Very few people in South Africa can tell you that they've heard me on the radio or seen me on television. And quite a lot of it are also very controversial issues that, like what I was telling you about the Zulu, the succession dispute. I mean, people were asking, so the people that I was working on the film, they were asking, what do you think? Is the Zulu king, is there going to be a king? And literally half of and these are people who think of themselves as experts. Right. They were just talking BS, to put it to you bluntly. Right, because they don't know the history, they haven't read the history, they're basing it on hearsay. But talking about contemporary issues, one of the things that I do is I work with artists. So a lot of artists often ask me to write catalog essays for them, to do translations for them. So when they are putting up an artwork, they want to express themselves in an indigenous language, like this is my language. And then they want to translate it into English for the popular sort of their galleries and all. So I often work with artists. So that's the area that I'm most comfortable in, a contemporary space, is working in the art world. I'm gonna be talking about Ernest Cole, the South African photographer who published a book called House of Bondage. It's just been republished, so if any of you want to buy it, his name was Ernest Cole, E-R-N-E-S-T, Cole, C-O-L-E. Now, Ernest Cole is exactly a perfect example of someone who knew that the only way he could be a professional photographer was by changing race. So he cut his hair, went and applied to be classified as a colored person. And so that's why he changed his name to Cole. And no one would throw shade on him for doing that. He he wrote this book, House of Bondage. So if any of you want to see what South Africa looked like in the 1950s and 1960s, his book of photographs, absolutely amazing, absolutely stunning. So those are the contemporary issues I like dealing with. The other issues, I let them go. Like I said, the communications department at Whence is constantly like, the media. So let me give you an example of exactly what I consider to be like poor research. So one of South Africa's most famous artist, Esther Masham, turned 80 or 90. Did she turn 90 or 80? So around that time, everyone was talking about, I'm sure many of you have seen it, I think Jay-Z owns a few Esther Mashams. So it's kind of like a kind of African geometric painting. It's a tradition in South Africa where people use geometric shapes, squares, triangles, half circles, and they create these beautiful, it's a tradition where you paint your house like that using these geometric, and so she's turned it into an art form. She even did like a BMW. So for any of you who've ever seen Esther Masham's BMW paid her to do an entire car in that style. So she was celebrating her 80th birthday. So now instead of just saying, let's celebrate Esther Masham's 80th birthday, people then decide to celebrate her ethnic group. So then I get the email from the communications department at Whence, oh, this radio station would like you to come and talk about the Ndebeles. So then I write back to this person, I said, which Ndebeles? Guess what the answer was? There's only one. And I was like, oh, you do not know your history. You have not done your research. Because the name Ndebele is used for more than one ethnic group in Southern Africa. But the journalists thought there was only one. I was like, case closed, you're not going to be hearing from me. I'm not going to be coming on a radio station like, wow, there's the Ndebeles in Zimbabwe, but they have nothing to do with the Ndebeles in South Africa. No, you haven't done your work. Go do the work and then I'll talk. So can you understand what I'm sure? I think there was a question here.
I was just wondering, I know that in 2019, Ghana had a repatriate. For African Americans to come back.
Right.
Now I know some are, but I wonder what, in order to not make the same mistakes as the missionaries prior, and those who do come back, what would be to you, in your thought, the best possible role for African Americans coming back into this country to contribute to the country and not to become another problem?
Yes. Okay, so the first thing I would say is learn from the tradition, right? Because it is not the first time in history that people of African descent, people of the African diaspora, have come back to Southern Africa. So, for example, there's the Peregrino family. So they lived in Cape Town. The father and the son were from Ghana and they came to South Africa. What's his name now? I've forgotten. He was from the Caribbean and he came to South Africa and he opened a newspaper in South Africa. So there's a long, long tradition of this exchange between South Africa and African America. So I would say learn from the tradition. So don't come and be like, hey, I'm just gonna come and just give me whatever to do. You know what I mean? So that part of it, I think, is you have to understand a little bit of the history. What is the history between Southern Africa and America? And then I would say that for many of you who are thinking about doing this, is you also have to come already knowing what you would like to contribute. I don't think that you should just expect people to sort of hand it to you. Say, this is the part we would like you to play. You have to say, this is the part that I would like to play. This is what I would like to bring. And it's an overdue conversation. I think that black people, we need to have just like a big conference. We are only talking about black people. Conference. And we need to have that conversation as black, and even within South Africa. So as I said, you know how under apartheid I mentioned that people of mixed race were put in a different racial group. Yeah. That conversation between people of mixed race and black South Africa hasn't happened. And every once in a while things flare up that show that the conversation hasn't happened. Right? So people of mixed race often say, under apartheid I was not white enough and now I'm not black enough. Right? And so that conversation needs to be had. And we are I think, dangerously postponing the conversation because it needs to be had. And that's a conversation that I would be willing to participate in. The one that I'm not willing to participate in is the one that we were talking about earlier. The one about going around going, you're not black, you're black, you're not black, you're black. I'm like, no, I'm not a racist. I'm anti-racist. So for me, that's what it means to be an anti-racist. It means you also have to be against the idea that somehow black people, just because we share the same skin tone, it means we must share the same ideas, the same politics, the same... That's not what blackness is about. It's in fact, I think as black people, we're even more beautiful in our differences. I'm like, who would give away all this beauty just because you want to say, no, black people can't have green eyes? I mean, these are some of the things that my students will say. Like, well, they can't be a black person who've got green eyes. I'm like, have you been to the internet and type black person with green eyes? Loads of black people have got green eyes. Loads of black people have got red hair. Like things that people just think, oh, well, they can't be a black person because they've got red hair. I'm like, really? Is that the limits of your imagination? Because to me, that then becomes the limits of their imagination. Yeah. It's like black people contain every single genetic code in the world. You know, so if a black child is born with pointy ears, that's part of blackness. I don't know. Like, I have no idea. But as I say, because of the influence that I was raised with, growing up in a multicultural family, and everywhere, like, so you know this concept of a yellow bone. So in South Africa, there was no such concept before 1994. So talking about commodification. And then when apartheid ended, all of a sudden, there were yellow bones all over South Africa. Oh, I mean, so-and-so is a yellow bone, so-and-so is a yellow bone.
Oh, we say red bone. Red bone, yeah.
No, I think in America you've got both, actually. Yeah, you've got red bone and yellow bone. Yes. So there are people who are red bones and there are people... So in South Africa now, people are totally obsessed. So the other day I was in an Uber, and the Uber driver, almost quoting straight out of Toni Morrison, "What have I done?" He said to me, he said, "What have I done?" He said, "Sister, you've got such a beautiful complexion." He said, just recently, he told me he was concocting pharmaceuticals for people. He said a woman asked him for a pill to take so that she could be a yellow bone. And he actually created this magical concoction that makes you into a yellow bone. I was like, he said, "I wish I could take a picture of you and show it to her and say, you're beautiful." And I was like, have you read Toni Morrison's Bluest Hour, The Bluest Eye? That's exactly a line from that, "What have I done?" That's why you should have read the book before you get... And if I told you what he told me he put in this concoction, he put turmeric in this concoction. They're supposed to make you lighter skin. And there is actually a scientific basis, but it's actually it's almost like turmeric poisoning. You are taking so much turmeric, it turns your skin yellow. And it's like, this is what... I was like, no, this can't be true.
That's a part of America we don't want to bring.
That's exactly. And I think actually it would be the perfect conversation to have, in which actually, as African Americans, you say, listen, this yellow bone thing has caused enough trouble in our own communities. Please, just give it up.
But on the other hand, in cultures like Russia, the Ukraine, they are harvesting melanin and selling it as an injection at thousands of dollars a vial for the chemical that makes the skin black and the substance that makes one black. You know, so it's the duality that has to be discussed so that people really understand the nature of the demonization of blackness. Yet, while you are demonizing, you are imitating the very thing, the hips, the lips, the bone structure, the hair, all that makes us who we are. You know?
But I think an even bigger conversation is about actually what I call the plasticity of the body. Because our ancestors used to practice a lot of things that now you would just think, Wow, you used to do that? Like, you can break the bridge of your nose of a child, right? And press it until the child has got a smoother forehead. Our ancestors used to do all these things. You shape the child's head, you shape their feet, you shape their face, you shape the body is plastic. The body can be changed into so many things, which is why it is that in some ways fighting over bodies is not the right fight. We should be fighting over the ideas behind that. The ideas behind the idea that, if you've got a nose that is of a particular shape, you're a better human being, you're more noble, you're more this, you're more that. So, that's the body is very plastic. So in South Africa, for example, back in 1992, our government legislated against hydroquinone. So you cannot put hydroquinone in products. I think you can put a minuscule amount, but even then, you have to get a doctor's prescription to get even that minuscule amount. But guess what people are now doing? They are doing exactly, they're calling them vitamin injections, where you go and inject yourself with glutathione, and it makes your skin lighter. So there's a South African celebrity, I don't know even how to tell you this joke. So there's a cracker in South Africa that comes. So there are these biscuits that black South Africans buy mostly around Christmas time. It's like a huge big, they call choice assorted. And one of the crackers in there is like pink in color. She looks like that cracker now. So people just put that.
We got crackers too.
So people just put that pink cracker and then her next to her and be like, girl, stop with the lightning. You're beginning to look like a biscuit. And it's exactly, it's just so, she's literally like, and then when she talks about the expense, because again here, it's about the fact that for many people it's a status symbol. It's not really that they want to be white. It's that they want to be light enough to still be black, so to still claim black culture. So this is where the conversation to me comes in. Is, so you want to be black, so you want to, snap like a black person, do your nails, be like, put your little diamonds on your nails and blah, blah, blah. But then at the same time, you want that film role, you want to be auditioning as a light-skinned person. No. Carry the burden, enjoy the benefits, carry the burden.